Hi, welcome back. Thank you for joining the channel. In this tutorial, we're going to have a look on Java basics. So what is the Java syntax? What are the primitives and objects, conditions and loops in Java, arrays, methods and classes, IO streams, exceptions, collections, JDBC connections, and object-oriented programming. We'll go one by one in depth for everything so you learn from basics to advanced level. This course is just for a basics level. If you already know these things, please skip this series and go to the intermediate series or to the advanced series as per your level. In this series, we are assuming that you just came from another language or you are interested in learning a Java and you have never done a programming before. So we'll be covering everything from scratch, that how to write basic instructions, how to write loops, what are the four loops, while loops, what are the methods, what are the classes, how the Java read the streams and how to write into the file, how to write into a database, how to read from database, how to read from the files, what are the collections, for example, set, list, map, what are the purposes of these, what are the difference between the collections, what is the JDBC, how to use the JDBC, and finally, what is object-oriented programming itself, what are the concepts in an object-oriented programming, and how do we implement those object-oriented programming when we're writing a code. So let's get started. In day one, we're going to discuss Java syntax. What are the primitive types? What are the conditions we use? What are classes and methods in Java? So let's get started. Java has some interesting features. It has automatic type checking, automatic garbage collection. That means when you initialize an object or a primitive type, you don't need to ask for delete that from the memory. It will automatically do the garbage collection. The JVM, which has internal garbage collector, which runs at some point, and it will look for a null pointers or the objects or the value which has a null. It will try to remove it from the RAM. It has simplifies pointers, so no direct access pointer to the memory. We used to have in C++ the direct access to pointers, but in Java we don't have direct access to pointers. They're all internally managed by the JVM. We have simplified network access calls, and we have a multi-threading, which are very easy. We can use a multi-threads to use multi-threading tasking. We can create a locks. So if someone is trying to access the methods at the same time, we can block them. So it can be accessed one by one. For example, if you have a bank account and you're trying to withdraw money from two different devices, from your bank account and from your online bank account from ATM machine, so you can synchronize your method or you can block your access, that only one person can access that method at one single point of time. So how the Java works? So Java is independent only for one reason, that only depends on the Java virtual machine. So it is a cross-platform language. You developed into one language and you can run it any language. So that's called cross multiple platform language. It has the compiler, which is code in compiled to bytecode, which is interpreted by the resident JVM machine. Then it has just-in-time compiler at attempt to increase the speed of the compilation of your code. It is object oriented programming, so it has object oriented design as well. I'm not going to do in too much details about object oriented programming at this point, because I've left this for the later discussion. Once you have a very good understanding about the syntax and the methods and the classes, then we will discuss about what are the object oriented programming, what are polymorphism, inheritance, encapsulation, abstractions, these kind of things. Java programs contains nothing but definitions and instantiations of the classes. Everything is encapsulated in a class. We will see what does it mean encapsulate and what is a class, and then once we reach to that point it will be very clear that how we're trying to encapsulate something into a class. So let's dive in the basic Java syntax. So in Java we have two major categories. One is primitive data types and other is object data types. We start from a primitive data types. Primitive data types are the boolean, char, byte, short, int, long, float, double, etc. So for example, if you need to define a variable which take a value as true or false, then you need to define the variable as a boolean value. So that's the boolean which take either true or false. If you need to define only one character, for example a, b, or any special character, and you don't want to add any other character in it, so you need to define it as a char, char, char. Then you have a different types to define a numeric number. For example, you can define byte, short, int, long, float, double. So they all have a different capacity, the different minimum and maximum value intake. For example, what the int will take, the long will take more than the int. So if you have like requirement where you have like millions or billions of numbers, for example the bank account where you can have a millions of pounds or dollars, instead of using int you can use long. But then when you have something coming in points, for example you have like 32 pound and 50 pence, that pence need to be accommodated as well, and long and int does not take the point into the count. So you need to go for float or a double value. We will see in depth what are the main differences between short, int, long, float, and double. Just try to understand they are the primitive types. These basic or primitive types are the only types that are not objects, right? Anything else in a Java is an object, right? We'll see later what is an object, how to create an object. This means that you don't use the new operator to create a primitive variable, because these are not objects, so you don't need to create them with a new operator, right? You just define it as I need a boolean, so boolean flag is equal to whatever you want to set, true or false, right? So declaring primitive types are like this. So the float, you you put here the name float here, the float, sorry. So in order to define a primitive types, we defined that its a type is float, that's a float type, and then we define the name of the variable. It can be any name. For example, I'll say float amount. And once we need to end the instruction in Java, put this, right? If you need to define int, so you put int first and then the name of the int. If you need to define a multiple integers in the same line, you can do this just providing a comma and then the name of the second variable, and then if you want to define, you can define the value as well. So you can do this int a, so this is a definition, right? Then you can say a is equal to 10, so you define a value for that, or you can do both step into the same line. So this is equivalent to this statement, right? They both are equal. Okay, let's move on. As we mentioned, we can define two variables in the same line. So int a, and then if we define comma, it means we're going to put another variable. We say b. Here we don't need to specify the type because the type has already been defined. Then the colon, which completes one statement, right? So now you have int a and int b. If you need to define double, put double here, right? The name of your variable and the value if you want at this point, or you can leave till here, right? It will work fine. If you need to define boolean, just put a boolean here, right? The variable name, it can be anything, and then it's true or false. So you can say boolean is value, right? So I declared it, and then I can say is value is equal to true. So I initialize the value as well, right? I can do these two lines into one line as well, as we mentioned earlier. Okay, let's see few scenario where the compiler will give you an error when we start declaring things. So if you declare an int here, so this is an int declaration here. That's the int, and I'm defining the variable name index. It can be any name, but the value I'm defining is 1.2. As we know, the int cannot take the value in decimals, right? So this value is not allowed. So the compiler will give you an error that this is a wrong value, right? Int will cannot take an integer value like that in terms of decimals. If you define the boolean value, this is a boolean variable name. It can be any name with the 1. So the compiler gives you an error because the compiler is looking for two values for boolean, which is either true or a false, right? So if we define a double like this, so 5 divided by 4, it won't give you an error, right? It will try to resolve this, get the value which is coming into a decimal, then there is no error on it. Then float ratio, so float is a value which can take a decimal places, so that's the decimal places. That's fine, that's okay, no issue with it, right? So if 1.2f is a float value accurate to 7 decimal places, and the double is up to 15 decimal places, right? So if we have a value which can go up to 7 decimal places, we can use variable type as a float. If we have a value which can go up to 15 decimal places, let's say very scientific information which need to be very accurate, right? So that need to be defined into a double, so it will go up to 15 decimal places. So we'll see how we assign the values and what are the assignment types. All right, so now in order to assign the values, we need to say, for example, int x is equal to 10. So that's we initialize the value. A is mentioned, so int a is equal to 1, b is equal to 2, c is equal to 5. As the statement has not terminated here, so the b means the b has a type int and the c has a type int as well, right? So they're all int. So now we are assigning a value to each other. At this point, when the assignment will start, it will pick a value from the right, right? So at the right we have c. The c is a 5 here, right? So it will assign that 5 to b. So b become 5, and then the value of 5 will be assigned to a. So a become 5, right? So when we print this value, we get, so say a is equal to, so this is a kind of a string, and this we are trying to put our variable here, right? So it will put 5 here, so you will see a is equal to 5. Then this is a string, so it will print it as it is. B is equal to, then the value of this variable which is 5, and then c is equal to, because this is a string, is equal to, and then value of this variable, so it will be 5, right? So how we print it, we write instructions to the operator. It's called system dot out dot print, right? And here we can write anything we want. So we say hello world, right? And we close the statement. So when we compile and run, it will be printed hello world at the console, right? If we want to put a variable name here, for example, I want to do something like system dot out dot print, I will say value of b is, right? So this is a string which will be printed, but then I want to actually dynamically put the value of b rather than hard coding the value here. So what I will do, I put plus, it means concatenate it with the variable. So I want to print for a b, I just put here a b, right? And that's the variable here. So the b is a variable here. Then I close the bracket and close the statement, right? Then it will be print this value of b is whatever the value of b is at this point is 5, so it will be value of b is 5. So statements and blocks in Java. A simple statement is a command terminated by a semicolon. So this is a semicolon, right? If you want to terminate a statement, you can terminate your statement by putting a semicolon. We discussed this earlier. We can also define a multiple statements in one block. So block is a compound of statement. Block is a compound of statement enclosed in a curly braces. So these are the curly braces. So we can define a number of statements here. This is one statement terminating here. Second statement, we can write the third statement. For example, I can write int age is equal to 30, right? So this all will be inside this block. So block may contains other blocks as well. For example, I have one block, right? I put int a, then I can start another block in it, put another int b. You can close this block and then close the external block. So the block can contains other blocks as well. Flow of control in Java. The Java executes one statement after the other in order they are written. So many Java statements are flow control statements. Uh, Flow control means they will be executed as they are defined, right? So if for the alternations, for example, for a choice based alternation, we can use if else or switch statements. To loop around something, for example, where we have multiple things and we want to loop around, we can use for, while and do while loops. For escaping from the loops, we can use a break, continue and return. We'll go one by one on each of these items and see how they operate in Java. Let's start with the if condition. The if statements evaluates an expression, and if that evaluation is true, then the specified action is taken. For example, we defined here if x is less than 10, then assign the value x to 10. What we're saying here is that if the value of x is less than 10, right, then we're saying if this is true, so if this value is true, then proceed and assign x to 10 or to 20 or whatever we want to assign it, right? Then another way of doing it, if you want to do multiple instructions here, what we need to do, we'll say if x is less than 10, then the block will start the curly braces, and then we can write an instructions here. For example, we'll say x is equal to 10, then we can print something here, or you can say system dot out dot print and the value of x to be printed, right? And then we close that bracket. So that will be the if condition, right? If this is true, these two statements will be proceeded. If this value is false, so let's say x is not less than 10, x is equal to 100, then these statements will be ignored and the program flow will continue from this point, the next line, if there is something is here, right? So this is the alternative way defined here, the block way. Then you can do it in a block. So this is a block. Block is normally used when we have a multiple instructions there. So then we need to define a block. If we have a single instruction, then we can proceed without using the block. So when we do comparison, we need to use operators to make that comparison. For the comparison, we have different operators. So we have equal to. So there are two kind of equal to. One is for the value assignment, which is just this equal to, right? One equal to, and this two equal to is actually for the comparison. So that's for a value comparison, right? This is for comparison, and this is for assignment. Okay. Then we have not equal to. So this is not equal to. Then greater than or equal to. It will compare the value if it's greater than or equal to, less than, equal to, and greater than or less than. So what is if else? The if else statement evaluates an expression and performs one action if that evaluation is true, or a different action if it is false. For example, say if the value of x is not equal to this old x, may be some in a defined variable, so you assume that int old x is equal to 10 and int x is equal to 30, right? So what it's saying, if the value of x is not equal to the old x, which in this case it's true, so it will print this line, right? It will print x was changed because they have different value. But if we have the value of x is 10 as well, so this condition will become false because now x is equal to old value of x. So this statement, the block of statement, will not be executed, and it will come to this statement, else statement, and if this is false, it means execute this statement, right? So this statement will be executed, right? So one or the other, right? If the if condition is not satisfied, then else condition will automatically run it. Let's take an example of nested if and else. So if the value of variable is greater than 100, right? If this value is true, it will come to this point at this instruction and check for another if. So if reminder on is equal to true, so these are just variables. So this is a Boolean variable, right? And check if the value is equal to true. So if this condition is true, it will proceed with this statement, right? If this statement is not true, so let's say this is false, it will continue flow to this else statement, right? And proceed with this and terminate here, right? So this is the condition when this statement is true, right? Let's say this statement is false. So this statement is false. It will not proceed these steps, right? It will not going inside here because this is already false. So it will skip all these steps and go to the else condition, right? From here it will go to the else condition, right? And then go inside the else and start proceeding from this line, right? So it will print the value. So else if, so there is an else if, right? Useful for choosing between alternatives. So if the value of n is equal to n, execute this block, right? If this is true, proceed this, right? Then it will go to the next statement, right? It's not going to terminate it from the if. It's going to check a next condition as well. If j is equal to 2, then it will also proceed and continue with this statement, right? And if both are false, right, if both are false, so both are false, then it will go to the else condition and proceed with the next block of the statement. So it could check for the first if this is true, it will do the steps. Then it come to the next else, it check if this is true, it will do the steps, right, and skip the else condition. Okay, so we're going to present the two ways of doing if else conditions, the nested ifs. Can you find the difference? Why the first block, so this block, this part is wrong, and why this part is correct, right? Take 2 minutes, have a quick look, and see what are the differences between the statements and why the first one is wrong and the second one is correct. Right, I hope you figured out. So the first thing is saying the if condition. Inside the if condition, we're not defining any block, right? So it will take the next as the next instruction, right? And it will skip this part, right? Because this is not a nested block. So inside the if, one operation will be performed and the other will be skipped, right? Here you see we have a one curly parenthesis, so this is defining a block. Then it will proceed to the next if condition, and then this is one statement inside that if that's fine without providing any block. The one statement without a block is considered inline if conditions, and that worked fine. But here we have a multiple lines inside that if, right? That is the wrong way. So the compiler will start compiling, a compiler error will be flagging, and then you will not understand why this is happening. So it is a good idea that you should follow the block and the curly braces even if you have a one statement. I think it's a good idea to go for the curly braces rather than leave it in the single line. Before continuing with the flow, switch statements, and the loops, I would like you to have a look on the classes because they are very compulsory to understand what we're doing in a demo. So let's have a quick look on what the classes are, what are the purpose of classes, and how we create an object out of the class. In Java, everything is composed by a class. So it is a blueprint used to create objects. We use a keyword called class to create a class. Class name starting with the capital letter, right? This is the standard. It can be a lower letter or any other name, but normally the programmers they prefer to write the class name with the capital letter. Then inside the class we have a class variables, we have a method variables, class methods. We do have a constructors, right? Constructors are used to create an object for that class. We'll show you the example, what are the constructors and how do we use them, right? So let's take an example of a class. So we are creating a class, so this is a class keyword, and then the class name calculator, and then starting the curly brackets. So this is a class name and initialization of the class. Then we have properties or the variables. So far we have only learned about the primitive types. That's why I'm not including any objects in it, just including primitive types. So the first primitive type is int, and the size. So this is just explain what the size of the calculator will be. And then the next is the boolean value. Boolean, just to explain, is the calculator is scientific, is it true or false. It can be a standard calculator or can be a scientific calculator. And then we have a calculator here, so this is just a class name, right? Empty brackets, and there's nothing in here. So this is a default constructor, right, called default constructor. We can use this to create an object for the calculator without specifying any of these properties. The second constructor Again, with the class name, right, there is nothing here, no return type, no public, private, anything. And then inside we specify the variables we want to initialize at the time of object creation. So you say I want to initialize the size, I want to initialize the type, is it scientific or is the normal one, right? Then inside this constructor, this referred to the properties defined here, right? So this means this is a property of a class, and this size is actually coming from a method parameters or the constructor parameters. Similar with this dot is scientific, so this means belongs to the class is scientific, which referred to this property, right? And this is scientific is actually coming from here. So when you create object of this calculator, so for example I'm creating an object, so creation will be happening like this. So calculator class name, then you can give any name to the object, right? And then you will say is equal to new calculator, and that's close. So this you're using a default constructor, right? This is a default constructor. This is a default constructor. So it will create a calculator object for you for the name cal, and this will have the int size. Because there is no size set inside the constructor, it will set it to 0, right? Because for the int the default value is 0, and for the boolean is scientific, the default value is false. Because nothing is set, it will set it to false, right? So far we have discussed what are the variables, the class variables and the class constructors. So if we define the one constructor here and another constructor here, this is called constructor overloading. We can define any number of constructors, there is no issue. So let's say you want to define a constructor which only take just a size and you don't want to define this boolean value. You can do this, you can just say calculator int size, and then inside the body you just initialize this part, right, and just leave that property here. That will work fine. The third part in a class, we have a methods. A class can have a public and private methods. We'll come back to this public and private and protected things, but just try to understand how we create a method. So inside a class we can define the method name. So here the method name is add. Method is taking two parameters, int a and int b, right? So this is a method signature. The method is returning, so when you need to return something, you need to define what you are returning. So it return an integer, right? So whatever you return, that's return should be integer. So it is taking one integer a from here, then adding it to another integer b, so the result will be integer, right? For example, if you pass 2 plus 3, it will return an integer 5. So this should match to this one, right? So it will return that integer. So this is called a method. The method is defined as public, so it means it is accessible by object with a dot operator. So let's have a look how we create an object and how we call the methods. So more detail on methods. A method is a named sequence of a code that can be invoked by other Java code. A method takes some parameters. So if you see, it is taking one parameter here. This is of type float and this is our variable name. It performs some computation. So if you see it performing some computation here, right, and then optionally returns a value or object. So if this is returning something, if this computation is returning something, for example this is returning float or int, then we need to specify that my method returns something, right? So let's say you promise that your method will return something, and inside here you are not returning anything, you don't have any operation which will return some float value, then you will get a compile time error. Methods can be used as a part of expression statement. So what are the method signatures? The method signatures specify the name of the method. So this is the name of the method, right? The type and name of each parameter. So this is a parameter. We define only one parameter, but we can define as many parameters as we want. So this is a type of the parameter and the name of the parameter, right? The type of the value or object returned by the method. So what method is going to return, which type it is going to return. It can be a primitive type or it can be an object type. We haven't go through the object type, so I'm just focusing on the primitive types. So this float is a primitive type which the method is going to return, right? The method, the checked exceptions thrown by the method. We haven't seen what the exceptions are, but exceptions are something which, if something went wrong with your method, then what kind of error messages you will get back, right? You can define in your method signatures that my method will throw that kind of exception. So if someone is calling your method that need to handle that exception, we'll go through that handling of exception very soon. But just keep in your mind that we can specify exceptions with the throws clause with our method signatures. With the throw clause, we can say this kind of exception need to be thrown, or my method might throw this kind of exception. So if you are calling the method, you need to handle that exception, right? And then the last thing is the modifiers. So modifiers are here the public, private, protected. They are called modifiers. We'll see soon what the modifiers are and how we can use them. Right. So coming back to the modifiers, the public and private methods or data may be declared public or private, meaning they may or may not be accessed by code in other classes. So if your member variables are public or method is public, it means it can be accessed by the object from outside the class. So the good practice is keep the data private, right? So don't give access to data directly or the variables directly. They should be reachable through the methods, right? And try to keep most of your method private inside your class and only give a one interface, one method interface to call that private methods. So the well-defined interface between classes helps to eliminate errors and the security breaches as well. So how to use the objects? So here is the code in one class create an instance of another class and does something with it. For example, we have a class called fruit. So this is a fruit class and this is the instance of a class or an object of a class. In order to create it, we need to specify a keyword called new. So this is a keyword, right? And then the constructor of that class, right? So this is a default constructor without any parameters. So this is called default constructor. This is a default constructor, right? And then once we have the instance or an object of the class, what we can do, we can use that instance with the dot operator here and call the method of that class, right? So this is a method. And this method is actually returning something, which is it is returning an integer, because if you see, I have defined a local variable called int cals, that calories, and then I'm going to assign the value of whatever is coming back from here, from this method, to this variable. So this means this method is returning some kind of integer which I can assign to the cal. So dot operator allows you to access public data methods inside your class. In case if you have fruit class, then you can use the dot operator and then you can access your method variables and the method itself. Okay, so constructors. So the constructors are, we already explained what the constructors are. We can invoke a constructor method with which you can set the initial data of an object. As we mentioned, we can have a default constructor or we can have a constructor with some values, and that values actually we initialize the data of an object. And we can use a several different type of constructor with different arguments list. For example, this is a default constructor. You can have a constructor with one value. You can have a constructor with more than one values like this, right? So you can say int a, int b, float c, something like that, right? All right, we had enough discussion about primitive types, conditions, classes, and methods. So let's have a look how they actually work in Java. I've opened Eclipse IDE. If you are not using Eclipse IDE, that's fine. You can use any other IDE of your choice, like NetBeans, IntelliJ, or any other. That's absolutely fine. You should have JRE and JDK installed on your machine to run the program. So let's get started. This is the empty uh, IntelliJ or Eclipse folder. What you need to do, you click on the file, click new, and then select Java project. If you don't have Java project visible on the list, what you need to do, click other, and from the list you can select the Java project and next. So you can name your project. So I'm saying lesson 1 demo, right? I'm using GRE 1.8. If you're using GRE 1.7, 1.6, or 1.9 or 1.10, that's all fine. There's no issue. So click next, right? And then you say click finish. So you will see the project has been created on Package Explorer. Just click on this and you see the source folder is here. So click on the source folder, right click. Now we need to create a class. So say new and select a class. You need to specify a class name, right? So I will say class name is calculator, right? And it's giving me the few options right here. The method stubs. Would you like to create a method stub? Say public static void main, constructors from superclass, inherited abstract methods. We will discuss all these things one by one. But for time being, I'm going to select public static void main method. Void main method is used by the JVM to run the application. We don't need to call the main method. The JVM will automatically deduct the main method and run your program. So this will be the initial point from where your program will start running, right? So I will create this automatically. If I don't do this, I can create the method as the normal methods we create, but that's the handy tool. So I'll click on this one, click finish. When you finish, your class will be created. So this is the public class, and this is the name of the class, and that's the method, public static void main method. Don't worry about static void kind of things. We will explain everything in detail. So this is the entry point where the program execution will start when we click to start the program, right? If I define anything after that, something like that, say int a or something like that, it will not be picked up by the JVM because this is not a part of execution, right? This is just a part of a class that needs some object to run on it. So just ignore this part, right? And start processing inside the main. What we need to do, we need to specify here the primitive types, right? I will going to specify some primitive types. Let's say int age, right? So that's the definition, that is a type of integer, and then we'll say age is equal to 30. So that's the declaration, the value assigned to the age. I can do these two steps in one line as well. So if I just do this, age is equal to 30, and that's fine, then I don't need this line, right? I can assign the boolean b boolean, so I say is old, and I can assign the value true false because this is the boolean, right? And after that I need to print out these two things, right? In order to print, we use a method called system.out.print. If you see inside print, there are different kind of prints: printf, println. Printf is used for when you use to print something with the formatting. Println is used to print everything onto the new line, right? So just leave it like this. And I need to print something. So I need to print age, right? So I will say age is, so this is a string which I want to print, and then I want to print a variable. So to print the variable, I have to press with a plus, which is for concatenation, and then say age, right? And then I will save it. I'll say save all, or I can say Control S, it will save it. Now I need to run it. In order to run the program, you'll see the play button is here. So called run calculator.java. If you don't see it, don't worry, just click on the lesson, right click, and you will see the options in your menu bar here to run the program. So say run as Java application. All right, run as Java application. So I will click on here the play button. This will be playing and printing this message, age is 30, right? That's cool. Let's look on the syntax of if else condition. So in order to define the condition, say if, and this need to be boolean value uh, to execute the if conditions. So the boolean value is old. So what I'm saying, if the boolean value which is old is true, then what I'm going to write, it's going to be processed here, right? So if I'm going to say copy this part, print it here, so by the time this the JVM will reach here, it will read if and is old. If the value is true, then it will print this part, right? So save it and run it. So you see age is 30, age is 30. They are both coming to the same line because we haven't specified it that we need output onto the separate lines. So let's specify that we want it onto separate lines. So it's print ln. Ln means it will be a new line, right? I will save it, run it, and now you'll see it's coming onto the separate line. I don't want to see this first line, but I want to keep it into my code, so I need to comment this. In order to comment a single line, we'll say, sorry, it's the wrong place. So in order to comment single line, we'll just specify with this. And now this has been commented. I will save it, run again, and now only this line is processed. Okay. I want to say if is not old enough, right? If this value is false, then print this value. So I say is not, right? It not. I use the expression not, and then I will print this one. Say nothing is printed because the value is true here. So I will say if it's not true, means if it's false, then process this one. In this case, this is true. So in order to process this, I will change this to false. False. I will save it, and now it is processing. It is coming here. If is old enough, is this false? Yes, it's false. Condition is true. So processed it, right? So if the condition is false, that's fine. Don't process this one, but process something else. So let's say else age is not satisfied. I'll save this, run it, and now we'll see, because this flag boolean value is false. So if it's not true, it's false. This means skip this part, split the whole block, right, and go to the else and start running it. Okay, my next condition is to to check on to the age variable rather than onto the boolean value. So what we need to do, say if age equal to 30, then processed here, else process this line, save it. As we know, age is equal to 30, so then we are sure that this part will be processed and this part will be skipped. Run this, and age is 30, right? If we need to see if age is equal to 20, else one more condition, if age is greater than 20, then see the effect. So I'll just run it. So say age is not equal to 20, right, because age is 30, so this block is not processed. Then it came to the next statement and start looking on else condition and say else if age is greater than 20, so age is 30 which is greater than 20, so it processed this line, right? If I say age is less than 20, saved it, and now nothing will be printed out because this condition is not satisfied and this condition is not satisfied as well, right? So save it and rerun it. You see nothing has been printed because both the conditions are not satisfied. But if I do this else and print out something, run it. So the first condition is false, the second condition is false, hence you reach to the else condition and it is printed that you are in else condition. Now I'm going to create a new class. So just click on your project, right click, new, select the class and the name of the class. So I'm going to give it a name employee. At this point I don't need public static void main because I already have this defined in another class. So I just say finish and the new class has been created with the name employee. I need to define some parameters here. So I'll say float salary, int id, int age, right, and then I'll say so gender. So these are the properties I've defined it for the employee object, right? After that I need to define a constructor. If I don't define any constructor, the default constructor will be kicked on when I create an object, right? So I'm going to define a constructor. In order to define a constructor, we need to specify the class name. So employee, employee is the class name, then brackets. So this is a default constructor, right? I'm not going to specify anything in it, just leave it empty. Then I'm going to override the default constructor, the new constructor, and inside this I need to specify this constructor will take your salary, your id, your age, and gender. So I'm getting the values. I will get these values and I need to assign those values. What I need to do, I need to specify this. This means belongs to the class, and then this of salary is equal to salary, which I'm getting as a parameter. Then this dot id equal to id I'm getting as a parameter. This dot age, and this dot gender equal to gender which I'm getting it. So these are two constructors we have created. Let's define one method here. So the method will be public, so it can be accessed outside that class. So public, and then I'm not going to define here a return type for time being. So let's think of the method name. What will the method name? I need to return the age of that person, right? I'll say get age, and then I'm not taking any parameters. I'll just return age, or I can say return this dot age. They both work the same way. Now you see the compiler is giving an error, and the error is set method return type to int, right? Why? Because I'm returning the age which is of type int here, so I need to define what I need to return. So say public int get age, return age. So when this method will be called, the age of that object will be returned. So let's see this in action, right? I'm going to save this, Control S, and I'm going back to the calculator class. Inside here I need to create an object for that employee. So just class name employee emp1 equal to new is the keyword new, then class name. Then I need to specify which constructor I'm going to use. So let's use the default constructor first. Okay, and I need to call the method. So emp1, that's the object name, dot get age, right? I'm getting the age, and we know this age will return some kind of integer, so I can say this int a is equal to emp1.getAge, and then later on I can print that system.out.print and a. Okay, so I'm going to save it, run it. So the age is printed here 0. Why? Because we are using a default constructor. We haven't specified any age for that object, for that instance, and the integer default value is 0 if nothing is specified. So that's why it's coming 0. If I do this, rather than creating a default value, if I do this, if I say 2 and 35, let me have a look what constructor we have. So id and age and gender. So id is 1, and then gender is the character, so I'll say is the male, and I saved it. If I run this now, so I'm getting the age back because I've set this age to 35. So age is coming back 35. Okay, one thing we need to do is here, because all the variables we defined, they don't have any specifiers here, so we need to provide a specifiers here, and the best practice is to use a private specifier, because we don't allow anyone to change it from outside, and that need to be accessed through the methods. So that's private, that's private, that's private. So if I will not keep it as a private, for example I change it to public, let's see the impact. What impact do we have here? So I'll save the changes, come here, and after doing this I'm going to say a is equal to, in fact I'm going to change it, emp1.age is equal to 50, right? Because the age is public variable, I can use it with a dot variable, right? And then after that I can call this method again, I'll save it and run it. So you see the value has changed. I set it the employee as 35. Then later on in a program somewhere I've changed it, right? Purposely I've changed it to 50, and when I call the method again, his age has been changed, which shouldn't be allowed to change the age of the person, right? Because age never changed. Age keep increasing, and the program should keep in counter of that age or the ID or anything like that, right? We shouldn't allow any variables to be changed outside of the program accidentally or purposely. So what we need to do for this reason, come back to employee and we click here to make it private, right? And I will save it. Now we go back to the calculator class, but you see, I see an error here, right? Change visibility of age to package protected or to the public, right? And I don't want to do this, so I'll leave it like this. So the question arises, if I don't want to do this, how I'm going to set the value later on? Let's say if the salary is changed, I need to set a new salary for that employee. How I'm going to do it? And the answer is we do set getters and a setter methods for it. So the easiest way is to select all, right click, and then you look for an option here called source. So if you click on source and then say here want to get generators for getters and setters, so click getters and setters, and as I ask you for, like, you want it for all the fields or just for one field, I'll say I need it for age. I don't want for all, and I'll say okay. Now what happened, the method has created for me. I'll just change the location, right, to make it easy for you to have a look, right? So this is set age method has been created. I'll save that one. Now if I need to change it, I can call it now. Says emp1 dot set age, and then I will specify what the age will be, 50. This way we can change the age, right? So just going to have a quick review. So this is our class, this is a class name. So these are the variables, the class properties or the object properties. This is a default constructor. This is a constructor with the values. Then this is a setter method. This is another method, so we can define as many methods that we want. The method is not taking any parameter here. This method is taking one parameter, and this is not returning anything. So if the method is not returning anything, because this is just setting the values, not returning, we define it to the void. Void means my method will not return anything. And this method is returning integer because return age, which is of integer type.